How's it going, guys? This is Jordan Garcia with the chapter on the gift that keeps on giving. Reciprocity is responding to a positive reaction with another positive reaction. This creates a feeling of obligation, which is very uncomfortable. How do you respond to a gift? Is it a gift? Is it a bribe? Fairness in business demands transactions of merit and quality, not obligations or relationships. This poses the question, is business different than politics? Focusing on the first section of the book titled Nepotism in American Business, let's gain an understanding of these first three terms that are so similar in definitions but differ so slightly. Starting out, favoritism is the hiring or promoting of a person not because they're the most fit for a job or vacancy, but because of likes and preferences of the hirer. Cronyism begins with a more narrow view of favoritism, but ultimately leads to a decision being made towards friends or associates. Finally, nepotism is a specific view of favoring members of the family. This is seen throughout most businesses in America. These three terms are parallel in their understandings because they all interfere with the fairness in the workplace, giving undue advantages to someone who may not necessarily merit this treatment. Next, we'll focus on the difference between old nepotism and new nepotism. The difference is real simple. Old nepotism focuses on when parents used to hire family members or cut some strings, pull some strings in order to get family members hired. New nepotism is more of a bottom-to-top ideal, in such that children pursue career and family businesses voluntarily as opposed to relying on their parents. Next, I want to show you guys about a 4-minute cut-up of an interview from the Harvard Business Publishing titled The Dangers of Nepotism, an interview with Jill Corkindale, an executive coach. Enjoy.
I went to work and I found that a new guy had arrived. He seemed quite inoffensive, quite charming, quite engaging. Wanted to be shown the ropes a little bit. We're all happy to do that. Showed him the ropes, and this went on for 3 or 4 weeks, a short period of time, until I came in one day and found he'd suddenly been made my boss. And I suppose it was a delayed sense of outrage emerged, because this guy suddenly, from being a colleague and a rather junior colleague, was now telling me what to do. And I found that very hard to deal with, and I wondered if there were people out there in our community who were perhaps working with bosses who they couldn't quite understand why they were bosses, where they'd come from. And this is part of my understanding of nepotism, is they suddenly just appear, fully formed, ready to go, and nobody quite understands why.
So just to backtrack for a moment, this person was the nephew, I believe?
He was the nephew of the editor, and before he actually became my boss, we were quite friendly, and he actually confessed to me that his uncle had been told by his mother that his uncle had been told by this guy's mother he had to find him a job because it was the time he started work on a proper newspaper. So he was quite open, quite candid about it, and I thought, well, that's quite nice, looking after the family, why not? But when your career starts to get involved, when suddenly you see somebody leaping 4 or 5 steps up, you suddenly start to question this person and the system and how people get away with that. And I think he had quite an easy ride of things, actually. I think people didn't challenge him as much as perhaps they should.
I think we in the West tend to have a pretty negative view of nepotism. I guess occasionally, unless we are the beneficiaries of that. But that's not the case worldwide, as I understand it.
No, it's not the case. I mean, we have sort of accepted levels of nepotism in the West. And it's sort of understood those creative, perhaps painters, artists, the literary creative fields. Maybe people accept in the West that there's a sort of maybe the creative gene there. That's fine. But when it comes to business or to law or to medicine, yes, families do pull strings, but actually there should be some qualifications. There should be some meritocracy. And America is, founding values of American society is that the meritocracy, everybody should be able to get on. So it's deeply deep antipathy, I'd say, in in the West to this. In other regions, China, for example, the family structures are very important. And also in India, where you don't have perhaps. In India, you don't have the state doing so much for families. The family structure becomes the banking system. It becomes the sort of social system. So there's no surprise then that it becomes the business, the commercial system, because people work together. So you'd find that you'd have great business dynasties there. Global, where sons would be groomed in organisations. I've worked with many companies where you find there are people who are just there because somebody found them a job, and their performance isn't good, their motivation isn't good. They can become quite negative people in organisations. They can create a negative feeling around them, and unless we really open up our companies, our markets, our opportunities to everybody at every level, that this is quite, I believe, quite an insidious. It's an age-old problem, and I guess if you're a beneficiary of nepotism, there's probably a lot to be said for it. If you've got a great job and a great career opening up, but that's one in a million. For other people, this means a barrier to your skills, your talents, your life, your career, getting on, and sometimes also being part of the machinery that keeps this person in their comfortable zone. Doing the work for them, covering for them, making allowances for them. I don't think in our very dynamic or global, extremely competitive world that there really is a place for this any longer.
Next is the idea of birth versus merit. The biggest dilemma presented is the fact that few people see it as a problem. Connections, networking, and family will all be sources used when searching or recruiting for jobs. Maybe nepotism is an accepted fact of life. That being said, friends and family can usually be counted on for loyalty within a business, and office holders are in good position to know their strengths. Moving on, let's focus on bribes and gifts. A bribe in business is usually used to persuade someone to act in one's favor, typically unethically, through the gift of money or other inducements. The difference between a gift and a bribe is the hope or influence of a benefit. A gift is given without expectation of return, opposed to the bribe, which does have an expectation. In business, it's often hard to define this expectation, making it impossible to determine. Some argue that receiving these gifts are just well-deserved quote-unquote perks of office work. It may even be considered part of the job. As a result of the U.S. Secretaries Exchange Act Commission's investigations in the mid-1970s, over 400 U.S. companies admitted making questionable or illegal payments in excesses of $300 million to foreign government officials, politicians, and political parties. The abuses ran the gamut from bribery of high foreign officials to secure some type of favorable action by a foreign government to so-called facilitating payments that were made to ensure the discharge of functionaries. The anti-bribery provisions of the FCPA make it unlawful for a U.S. person and certain foreign issuers of securities to make a payment to a foreign official for the purpose of obtaining or retaining business for or with or directing business to any other person. The Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 refers to 4 provisions of the Banking Act that limited commercial bank securities activities and affiliations between commercial and security firms, basically eliminating the institutions referring to each other's services. Insurance underwriting will disallow the creation of one-owns insurance for its own personal business use. A conflict of interest occurs when a personal or institutional interest interferes with the ability of an individual or institution to act in the other party's interests. A fiduciary is a person who is entrusted to act within the interest of another, to act for someone else without the benefit of gaining any material except with the knowledge or consent of that person. This concludes my video. Thank you for your time and your attention.